For the folks who have yet to decide who they're going to vote for Jacksonville's next top cop, why should they choose you?
Well, if the voters want change, they want me as the next sheriff. I believe that it's time to have a different leader that sees from a different lens and understand that we have to begin to address our crime issue and quite frankly our community relationship issue from a different perspective. A vote for me is an investment in both law enforcement and community. So I think that it's time for change.
What do you think got us, the status quo currently is what you're talking about changes. How did we end up in the situation we're in currently?
Well, I think that law enforcement has changed over time, and it's time to change a culture of the police department. So 70% of our agency have 7 years or less on the street. So we're working with more younger, innovative officers, working with the latest technology, and they need a new type of leader. A leader who's going to focus on the culture from the inside out of the police department, a leader who's going to focus on cultivating a culture of community policing, and a leader who's going to focus on reducing violent crime in all parts of our city.
And I'm sure there are lots of planks in your platform, but if there were one that you were going to pull out and say, this is my main priority, this is my one issue, what would that be?
The one issue, again, I believe that it's the culture. I think that law enforcement has evolved over the years, and the fact that we have such a young agency. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is very different than it was just 5 years ago. So again, you have younger, more innovative officers, and it's this opportunity to cultivate a more well-rounded officer.
It's been a bumpy road for JSO over the years, especially this last year. There's debate over the crime or the clearance rate for homicide. There have been lots of arrests of officers or corrections officers. Where do you stand on that? I mean, what have you seen in your time with JSO that were major issues, and how did you help solve those?
Right, so the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is no different than other agencies and organizations. We all have issues because we're human, and I just think that, again, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is one of the best agencies in the country. We have the best technology, training, and people, but there are certainly areas that we need to improve, and as the sheriff, I intend to make those improvements.
It's interesting because I anchor on Sunday nights, and so I feel like every other weekend, sometimes every weekend, it's a headline, another violent weekend in Jacksonville, another deadly weekend in Jacksonville. How do you intend to curb violent crime specifically? I mean, what does that actually look like to you?
Right. So first of all, I think we've been trying to curb violence for the last 2 decades. So the way that we've been addressing it is ineffective. So what I intend to do is what I was able to do as a zone commander in the Arlington Beaches area. When our city saw a 4% reduction citywide, under my leadership, we saw a 16% reduction in crime. So, and what I like to call it is an integrated public safety model. So you have to begin to address our crime issue from a more comprehensive approach. And this whole idea that you have to either have law and order or community policing is why we have failed to address this violent crime issue effectively. It has to be both of them, and I was able to show that if you do that effectively, you'll get a 16% reduction in crime. Just imagine if we're able to do that all over our city.
I mean, that would be great. Does that look like knocking on doors? Does that mean getting out of your car and walking around? I mean, from someone at home in a neighborhood, what would they see that would be different?
That's right. It's more police presence. It's more positive engagement with police officers. It's us really being intentional about building stronger partnerships with the faith-based, our business community, our community itself. That's what it looks like, us getting out of our cars, partnering, doing walks, community events, and working with our community to problem solve a lot of the issues that's going on in our community. That's what we have to do. We have to re-engage and redevelop and restore trust within our community.
It's interesting, trust is a word, and restoring relationship with the community is something that every single candidate has said to me so far, and every single candidate has been at some point an employee of JSO. What led to this breakdown with the relationship between the sheriff's office and the community they're supposed to protect?
Yeah, so from my professional opinion, I believe that over the years, as we put community engagement into a program or a unit, the gap between the community and law enforcement has widened. So we have to get back to the basics, and that is really cultivating a culture of community policing. So while others are saying, you know, what we need to do, I've done it and I have the results. So again, 16% reduction in crime. You know, you don't do that if you don't have strong partnerships, if you are not cultivating a culture of community policing, if you're not ensuring that you are investing in the actual police officer who's doing the work. So you have to look at it from a collective standpoint.
That's so interesting too. I did not realize that we had such a young police force. When it comes to homicide solve rates, there has been some discrepancy on JSO's own transparency page and what they say the clearance rate is. Where do you stand on that? I mean, what is your thought?
So the homicide unit, our investigations unit, is just a piece of the pie. They are really reactive. They're coming after the fact. We have to get to the point where we're being proactive so we can prevent crimes from happening in the first place. So again, it goes back to my public safety, my integrated public safety model, where we have to look at our crime issue from a holistic perspective. That means more education, training on the front end for community and law enforcement. That means being intentional about partnerships with our community stakeholders and working with our local entities, nonprofits, to invest more in intervention and prevention and do enforcement. It's not one or the other, it's all of it collectively. So the detectives, they do a good job, and as sheriff, I'll make sure they have the tools and the resources that they have to do their job, but that's just part of it. The other part is, how do we work with our community to address a lot of our issues that's happening?
When it comes to a culture change, that's not just between the community and the agency. Culture changes oftentimes happen within the agency itself. Do you see changes there, or do you want to make changes there, and what kind of changes?
Yes, absolutely. So I believe that until we change the culture from within, it's very difficult to successfully serve our community. So when I talk about culture, because of the nature of in the environment that law enforcement is in, we have to really invest in the mental health of our officers. We talk about mental health a lot of times, but a lot of times we are excluding the person, the frontline person that's going out here, going face to face with crime and a criminal element in our community. So when you think about the chronic and acute stresses of this job, and you think about this young generation of officers now coming to do this job, it behooves us as a leader to invest in the mental health of officers, to make sure that their morale is high, to make sure that they are properly trained, to make sure that they have mentors and coaching out there, and make sure they have supervisors that's holding them accountable. But ultimately, we have to have a sheriff that's going to model what that looks like.
We didn't see very much of Sheriff Williams during his tenure in front of the cameras, not a whole lot in the public. Is that something that would potentially change with you?
Absolutely. You know, a lot of people are talking about the lack of transparency. I think transparency begins with the sheriff. So I intend to be visible, accessible, and accountable to the people. So whether that is community walks, attending neighborhood meetings, you know, I think that it's important for the sheriff to be on the front line leading.
There are 5 candidates, and we've seen some trends with the past sheriff when it comes to violent crime. You know, a budget that is continuing to expand, a city that is continuing to grow. Well, there's 2 questions to this. The first part, I think, is, do you think the answer moving forward in this time of growth and where we sit today is more of the same, to keep doing what the sheriff's office has been doing, or what you kind of alluded to earlier, changing the way, sorry, emergency alert everybody, or do you think the answer is to kind of upset the apple cart?
Well, if voters want change, they will vote for me. It is time for change. It is time to have a leader who sees through a different lens We need a fresh look at our budget. We need a fresh look at our police department. We need a fresh look at how we have been policing and serving our community. So I think it's important to have somebody new that have a different perspective. So if that's upsetting the apple cart, we need to do what's best for our agency and for our community.
Jacksonville's sitting on a precipice, I think, of major change. This election, the next mayoral election, is really going to usher Jacksonville into this new era with all of these new people, businesses coming.
Right.
A lot of people actually go to St. Johns County for schools or for crime that they claim. How do you, first, what are the unique challenges of this new version of Jacksonville? And then how do you handle that?
Right. So again, I think that the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is one of the best agencies in the country. So again, I think that there is room for improvement. And as a sheriff, I'll do an assessment of our agency and see where those gaps are, and we'll fill those gaps. So the things that we're doing good, we're going to continue to do them. But the things that have been ineffective, we're going to change that.